Big Pharma earns a 76% gross profit margin, and three corporate middlemen pocket 41 cents out of every dollar Americans spend on prescriptions. But it doesn't have to be this way. In this episode of Care Talk, Alejandro Molina at Groundwork Collaborative breaks down a bold new plan that could change everything. Welcome to Care Talk Live, a weekly American healthcare policy show and podcast where we explain how healthcare works or doesn't work and get you answers. I'm Laura Packard, cancer survivor and healthcare advocate, here to help you. Be sure to subscribe to my channel or podcasts wherever you get your podcasts to get future Care Talk shows. Groundwork Collaborative's AmericaRx proposal calls for a federally backed network of publicly owned pharmaceutical factories built in partnership with states and localities to manufacture essential medicines at scale, paired with a public PBM, pharmacy benefit manager, to cut out the big three middlemen, CVS Caremark, Express Scripts, and Optum Rx. So welcome to Alejandro Molina, a policy fellow at Groundwork Collaborative.
How are you doing?
So let's start with the problem of high costs of prescription drugs. And we've talked a lot about that and various strategies to deal with this, including negotiating lower drug prices on the state and federal level. But let's talk about some of the other ways pharmaceutical companies are making these huge profits, and your research, your proposals for what to do to make medicines cheaper for patients.
Yeah, so I think the problem of lowering drug prices is complex, but I think the obvious issue is there's a lot of incentive and waste in the system that ultimately benefits big corporations, including both the manufacturer and the insurer. The manufacturer, especially on expensive drugs, basically has no competition, no consequences when they own the patent for a drug. The federal government gives them over 20 years to have sole permission to manufacture this very expensive drug, which means that they can charge you, the patient, and your insurance whatever they want. That is, I think, one essential element of it. The second is when you go to pick up your drug at the counter, who determines how much you pay and how much your insurance pays for it? It is something called the pharmaceutical benefit manager, which is a part of your insurance company that basically has all control over what your copay is, what your co-insurance is, and which pharmacy you can pick your drug up at the end of the day. And so what this proposal really lays out is, can we remove the middleman from the equation? Can we have an impartial arbiter that basically determines the price that you pay at the counter, and then at the other end of it, the manufacturer that is not incentivized to hike prices just to benefit their shareholder. So at the end of the day, this is an attempt at a comprehensive reform that isn't just trying to solve the symptom, but try to create an alternative system that isn't harming the patient at the end of the day.
So, if somebody wonders if this is actually practical, if the federal government and states can manufacture drugs, can you talk about what California has done for insulin?
Yeah, so California decided that instead of trying to wait for manufacturers to lower the price of insulin, they decided to take things into their own hands. So they created a program called CalRx, which is designed to manufacture insulin and distribute it through their Medicaid system. And so they partnered with a nonprofit manufacturer with the hope of eventually manufacturing their own insulin themselves. So it is a step towards publicly manufactured insulin in the state of California. distributed through the California Medicaid system. And so it is not a full-scale public manufacturing state effort, but it is a step towards it that I think is a good example that we could use and other states should look toward.
Mhm. And do other countries have governmental run drug manufacturing facilities, or is it all private, for profit pharma companies making those drugs?
No, in fact, the U.S. in the past has uh, manufactured their own drugs. Massachusetts has manufactured vaccines. Michigan has manufactured vaccines. And in other countries like Brazil, like Thailand, like India, either have manufactured drugs directly through um, public organizations or through uh, public-private partnerships. And so I think there is a real precedent here that the U.S. should look towards.
So this would save patients and governments a lot of money. Why hasn't this happened yet? What's stopping us from doing this?
I think one, it is a different frame of policymaking that the United States is not used to. We are used to regulating um, through law, through lawsuits, or through small tinkers and regulatory changes. We are not used to uh, finding a problem and creating an alternative solution to fix it. So one is a mindset. Two is the pharmaceutical lobby is large and influential. And so to challenge their market share to provide an alternative, um, I think is um, very frightening to a lot of policymakers. And so it is partially will, it is partially uh, political reluctance and a lack of imagination is what I would say.
So, drugs cost so much from their manufacturer. That's one of the reasons why generic manufacturers were created, right? To once a drug is off patent, then generics are supposed to come in and offer a cheaper version. Why is it better or good to just have public manufacturing as an option versus changing patents so that generic drugs can be made faster?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And studies show that the introduction of even just one more competitor into a generic drug can dramatically lower the cost because competition, is shown to lower costs. The problem with generic drugs is often it's almost the opposite issue of branded drugs. They are often too unprofitable for the big manufacturers to produce them, and so we often have really useful drugs that people need that manufacturers are unwilling to produce because it's not good enough for their bottom line. Uh, and so we have a whole suite of drugs out there that are either only have one manufacturer or have no manufacturers. And so the um, potential for the federal government or state governments to serve as that backstop of manufacturing drugs that people need, but that big pharma isn't going to profit from, is sort of a missing part of our pharmaceutical system that often leads to essential drugs being in shortage. Things like cancer drugs, things like um, uh, critical insulins. There have been shortages in baby formula, um, just not because of patents, but because there is a lack of competition and a lack of resilience in our generic drug system.
So, state or federal governments or partnerships manufacturing these drugs also would help with shortages as well as hopefully competition bringing down prices. So if you're a patient at home listening to this and you're paying outrageous prices for your medications right now, what can anybody do to get their elected officials to go forward with reforms like this, given that pharmaceutical companies are spending billions of dollars lobbying legislators saying, don't make any changes. The system as it is works great.
Yeah, I think one is continue to personalize and tell your story about how the outrageous price of medications affects your lives, and two, uh, point out examples of other states that are innovating in this way. Point out California again, that is finding a um, really innovative ways to lower the cost of drugs. Um, uh, Point out states like West Virginia who have uh, basically created versions of a public PBM to cut the middlemen out in determining the cost of drugs and have saved hundreds of millions of dollars. Point out things like, Mark Cuban's cost plus drugs that have basically gone directly to consumers um, and shown that cutting out insurers can actually dramatically improve both the patient experience and reduce the cost of generic drugs. I think telling the story, but also encouraging policymakers to think beyond the traditional paradigm of policymaking that is just, small tinkers here and there, but that actually don't lead to patient results, I think is always helpful.
Mhm. And I think if for Mark Cuban's drug initiative, I think it's important to point out that manufacturers can make profits off of making these drugs, even if they're cheap drugs. It's just they're choosing not to manufacture some drugs because the profits aren't high enough for what they would prefer to be making, rather than they can't make a profit at all on manufacturing some of these drugs, right?
Totally, yes, it is. The the modern pharmaceutical system is looking for home run drugs. That is what they care about, um, and any drug that doesn't clear a certain hurdle is not going to be prioritized. In fact, um, when I was in the administration, we dealt with an insulin that was a formulation that was preferred by children and pregnant women, and uh, it was discontinued not because it didn't have a a use or a patient base that relied on it. It was discontinued because the manufacturer wanted to shift towards GLP-1s in its factory lines. Why? Because GLP-1s have higher margins uh, and will continue to have higher upside in the future. And they did that even though they knew that discontinuing this yet profitable but not as profitable drug would hurt a large group of patients. And that is ultimately the incentive of these companies, it's to maximize profit. Sometimes you get really, you know, good side effects from that, from R&D, but often you get uh, profits over patients in most cases.
Yes, a friend of mine was a research scientist working to cure cancer in his lab. And because of the for profit company's priorities, they personal sexual drugs were prioritized over the cancer research, and his project was cut. So, uh, big for-profit pharmaceutical companies, it's their duty to their shareholders to maximize profits, and their duty is not to provide the most cures to the world or to help the most people. It's to maximize profits. So that is the system as it is, but that's not the way the system has to be. So tell us more about how people can find out about this proposal from Groundwork.
Yes, please read the paper. It's on Groundwork Collaborative's website. Um, and we will be doing more um, engagement with lawmakers over the next few months. Um, but I just appreciate the time here and the ability to talk about this important issue.
Thank you again for joining us. And a reminder to our audience that we have free or low-cost healthcare resources available on our website at healthcarevoices.org/caretalk. So check it out. Please text or call in your health insurance and healthcare questions at 202-838-6837, and we'll answer them in future episodes. And now our experts will answer your health insurance questions. So welcome to Louise Norris, Health Insurance and Healthcare Reform Analyst at healthinsurance.org, and Diane Archer, the founder and president of Just Care USA. So let's start with Louise and talking about some changes to the Affordable Care Act marketplace for next year.
Yes, thanks, Laura. So I just wanted to briefly touch on what we're seeing so far for premium changes for next year, because I think everybody's still, suffering from the sticker shock that we saw for 2026. Obviously, last year at this time, we were talking about, underlying full price average premiums increasing about an average of 25%. But then what people ended up seeing when you look at the average enrollee, their premiums went up a much higher percentage than that because of the expiration of the subsidy enhancements that happened at the end of 2025. So right now we have preliminary proposed rates from about a third of the states, and they are almost all of them are in the range of like 10 to 20% increase. So as we start to see more headlines about this coming out over the coming weeks, you could see where people will think, oh no, this is another round of what we saw last year. And it's important that people know that the sticker shock from 2025 to 2026 is now baked in. So if you're getting a subsidy in the marketplace, which is still the case for about 86% of enrollees, your subsidy will grow in 2027 to keep pace with the cost of the benchmark premium in your area. So when we talk about a double-digit rate increase again for 2027, that really only applies to the people who pay full price. Unfortunately, that is about 15% of marketplace enrollees this year, which is more than it used to be because those subsidy enhancements expired. And it would be great if there were additional legislation to fix some of that, it would be great if they could do that. But even if they don't, even if everything stays the same forever at this point, those increases that we saw in 2026 are baked in, and subsidies will now keep pace with premiums. So just a little reassurance for folks: if you're getting a subsidy, you don't need to start worrying that you're going to start seeing the same sort of rate increases we saw this year. That's not the case. We do have so far 8 insurance carriers across 21 states that are exiting the marketplace at the end of this year, with about 700,000 people affected. And that's as of right now. That number could certainly change as we get closer to open enrollment. If you're in a marketplace plan and your carrier's leaving at the end of the year, the marketplace has an algorithm to pick you a new plan, but you should not plan to rely on that. It's always better to comparison shop and pick your own plan rather than just letting the marketplace put you in a replacement plan. So just wanted to sort of get that out there since we're just a few months out now, and you will start seeing more and more headlines as we get closer to the fall.
Thanks, Louise. We had a call-in question from somebody who's turning 65 in February. They had to stop working as of March of 2024 because of some medical issues, and so they started receiving Social Security early. They were able to start working part-time last year, but then had to go on medical leave, and they became eligible for Medicaid, but they're afraid to go back to work because of these ongoing medical issues, and they're concerned about the Medicaid requirements, especially for someone who is 64, and so is almost eligible to get on Medicare, but not yet. Louise?
Yes. So this person it sounded like they were going to be going on to their birthdays in February, so they would be going on Medicare February 1. The work requirements for Medicaid do start January of 2027. They are only applicable to the Medicaid expansion population. They are not, most Medicaid enrollees do not have to worry about Medicaid work requirements. It's only about 20 million people out of like 80 million on Medicaid who are in Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion is only adults age 19 to 64. So once you turn 65, you don't need to worry about the Medicaid work requirement because you also don't qualify for Medicaid expansion anymore. When you turn 65, you should definitely go on Medicare. They're at that point to keep full Medicaid the way you've had under ACA Medicaid expansion. There's an income test and an asset test, whereas under the ACA for folks up to age 64, it's just an income test. Once you turn 65, you only continue to qualify for full Medicaid if you also have very limited assets. But there are Medicare savings programs, which are also run by the state Medicaid office, that can help with your Medicare premiums and out-of-pocket costs. So if you feel like the cost of Medicare is a struggle, you should definitely contact your state Medicaid office to see if even after you're 65, you can qualify for some help there. But going back to the Medicaid work requirement, it does kick in January of 2027 for that Medicaid expansion population, but it's whenever your Medicaid renews starting January of 2027 or later. So if your Medicaid renews in January, then yes, you would need to comply with the work requirement right away in January. But if your Medicaid doesn't renew until March or April, they don't check it until your renewal. So the other thing that's important for folks to know is if you are earning at least $580 a month, you're in compliance. And that can be earned income or unearned income. It can be Social Security, it can be interest, dividends, capital gains, or income from a job. You just need to be earning $580 a month. That takes the place of working 80 hours a month. So there are, so in this case, this person's getting Social Security, as long as it's at least $580 a month, even if they're subject to the work requirement right from the get-go from January 1, that would put them in compliance. And then, like I say, once they become 65, they're no longer eligible for Medicaid expansion anyway, so the work requirement becomes irrelevant.
Thank you, Louise. And now a question from Big Technology, who says that at a doctor's appointment today, I learned my health insurance plan dropped me. This person thinks they're on Medicare. They want to know, is there any advice? They've had no premiums or copays for the past 8 years because they had a car accident, medical issues, and they're not able to work. So SSDI gave their final no, and they're in an unstable situation. My mail was forwarded to a PO box, and they may not have gotten any updates on this. So they may not have seen any updates. And actually, I think that there was a KFF article that came out today about an issue of people, snowbirds in particular, that their Medicare drug plan had gone up from $0 to having a low monthly copay. And because they were snowbirds, they didn't get that notice. And so they got dropped from their plan and were not able to get on a new plan until next year. Anyways, all that having been said, this is a real issue with losing important paperwork, not having access to important paperwork, and getting dropped from your insurance policies and then being stuck until open enrollment, whenever that is for you. Diane, any thoughts?
Lots of thoughts always, Laura. And yes, I just read that same story about the snowbirds not being aware that their premiums had gone from $0 to whatever it was, $9 a month, and then being kicked off their Part D prescription drug plan. This is one of the big issues with corporate health insurers. If they don't want you, there are many ways they can get you off their plan, and one is but through non-payment of premiums. With traditional Medicare, that is not an issue I've ever seen. In this case, I'm so sorry about what's happened. I would advise that you do one of three things, and I'll go through each of them one by one, but it's contact your state Medicaid office about whether you might qualify for Medicaid, contact Medicare to make sure that if you were enrolled in Medicare and dropped from your Medicare Advantage plan, that you are now automatically enrolled in traditional Medicare, and contact your state health insurance department if you weren't in Medicare to understand what your options are through the state insurance department in your state. So let me go back now and just talk through each of these possibilities. So if you are on Medicare and your income monthly is roughly $1,816 or less, you are likely to qualify for what's called a Medicare savings program, which will pay your Medicare premium in most cases, or even Medicaid, which always pays your Medicare premium. And based on what you've reported, it is possible that you would qualify for one of these programs. So first step, contact your Medicaid office in the state and make sure that you are getting the benefits to which you're entitled and possibly free health insurance in that way. Secondly, if that's not the case, call your Medicare 1-800 number is probably the best way to go to find out what your rights are and to make sure that you have been enrolled in traditional Medicare. That is what is supposed to happen in these kinds of cases. And lastly, again, if it wasn't a Medicare issue, but rather an issue in the private health insurance marketplace, contact your state health insurance department, because again, if your income is low in many states, you may qualify for an exemption that provides special coverage to you for your basic healthcare needs.
Thank you, Diane. And thank you, everybody, for joining us to learn more about healthcare policy, patients' rights, the fight for a just healthcare system, and answers to your questions on health insurance and healthcare. Be sure to check out more free or low-cost healthcare resources on our website at healthcarevoices.org/caretalk. Please text or call in your health insurance and healthcare questions at 202-838-6837, and we'll answer them in future episodes. Join us next week for more. Be sure to subscribe to my channel or podcast wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Laura Packard, and this is Care Talk.